Hey guys, RanterInShades here, exercising my First Amendment rights vlog style. First of all, I just want to thank official GATG Stoutmeister for promoting me in one of his previous videos, the one that he made about elitism. Thank you, man. You rock, and I am grateful to have you as a friend. That really meant a lot, so thank you. Now, I wasn't even planning on making this video, because I thought this person was just being sarcastic. And he may be, I can't really tell for sure, because I looked at his channel and there was just nothing there. 0 subscribers, 0 videos, and 0 comments on his channel, and he joined yesterday. I'm serious. So I was at work yesterday and I was checking my email on my phone like I usually do. I usually like to sneak off, go somewhere quiet, like in the bathroom, open my email, do some interneting. And I received an email from this person who I'm not going to reveal his name until I show you the screen cap. Basically, he had a little bit to say on my Cartoons Suck These Days video. Now, it shows a different type of elitism. I mean, I know there's different types of elitism for pretty much everything, but, you know, he's pretty much a 90s elitist, and I'll show you what he had to say right now. So his name's the 90s Purist, and I had to click on his name to go to his channel because, you know, his channel's that new, he didn't change the URL, go through everything that I had to do when I created mine. You liked Danny Phantom and Billy and Mandy? How dare you! You're not a true, faithful 90s kid. You need to develop real taste and realize that everything today sucks. Now, I thought this guy was being sarcastic. Again, who knows? You know, the kind of sarcasm, you know, jokingly kind of thing. So, I comment back to him saying, your username is pretty laughable. I'm not sure whether you're being sarcastic or if you really do believe you know everything about the 90s. Why does it matter that some 90s kids, such as myself, enjoy some shows that weren't from the 90s? I don't give a shit what decade Danny Phantom and Billy and Mandy were from. I still enjoyed them. And he comments back saying, it matters because the 90s was perfectly good and the 2000s were perfectly evil. Everything from the 2000s must be destroyed. And then the 90s shows should be put on loop on all channels. Come on, that's a good idea. Because they would make money off of reruns. And they would please those of us who like truly good shows. But apparently you're not one of them. So fuck you! Well, that was certainly a good bit to take in. Again, there is a good chance that this person really is sarcastic, but again, his username, it's pretty laughable. I guess I sort of already knew about these kinds of elitists, these 90s elitists. I mean, who knows how old this person really is. He may just be some 12-year-old who wasn't even born in the 90s to begin with. I'd first like to, right now, just define what I define as a 90s kid, since I failed to do that in the Cartoons Suck These Days video. What I define as a 90s kid is someone who was either born in or was a kid throughout the 90s. Like, you know, born in, like, you know, the late 80s and lived for the most part, most of his childhood in the 90s. I don't consider anybody born in, like, the second half of the 90s anytime after 1996 to really be a 90s kid. I don't consider anybody born from 97 to 99 to be 90s kids, you know, since, you know, they were pretty much, you know, really, really young. Me being born in 1993, I've lived at least the first 5 years of my life in the 90s. In the year 2000, I turned 7. So that's good enough, at least in my opinion. I know it's kind of a subjective term. You can say, oh, you're not a real 90s kid since you weren't 10 by the end of the 90s. You know, people like this, I'm sure, will probably run around making that claim, trying to see who's really a 90s kid. He's no different than the fucking metal elitists. Alright. But that doesn't really matter to this video. Basically, I just want to talk about this generation, about the 2000s, about this decade, or at least the previous decade, since this is an entirely different decade. Really, the 2000s are really not that horrible. I mean, I'd pretty much be such a big hypocrite if I said that everything about the 2000s was pure shit. I mean, you gotta be just looking at the surface if you honestly think that everything about today is shit. Sure, I may not like some TV shows or cartoons like in that video. I may not like some of those. I may not like a lot of music today, but that doesn't mean that this entire decade is, 100% awful. There's still good music being made. There are still good TV shows being produced. Most of my favorite shows now aren't exactly 90s shows. I mean, South Park, yeah, that's technically a 90s show, I'd say. But shows like, The Office and The Big Bang Theory and shows like those aren't 90s shows. But I still like them. But what I really want to talk about is this elitist mentality in people like this, 90s kids like this, who think everything today sucks and just want to go back to the 90s. Look, you probably don't even realize how much of things today you're really taking for granted. I'd be taking so much for granted if I really wanted to go back in time. Like, you may not realize this, but things have improved so much since the 90s. Technology has improved a crap ton. Back then, the internet was brand fucking new. We weren't able to do so many of the things that we're able to do today. There was no video sharing, so I wouldn't be able to do this in the 90s. There was no MP3 players. There was no way to download music. The internet was all brand new, and a lot of this didn't come until the 2000s. So much has changed. So much has been accomplished in the 2000s that wasn't really the case in the 90s. And you just want to go back just for TV? I find that to be kind of selfish and really just a waste of time and being really overly nostalgic. I mean, it's one thing to be nostalgic. Like, I'm nostalgic of things a lot of the time. Like with TV, cartoons, certain games and whatnot. I'm nostalgic with those. It's one thing to be nostalgic, but it's another thing to take it way too far. Like in the case of this 90s purist here. It's quite another thing to take it too far, to the point where you're labeling people as not true 90s kids, or saying that everything today sucks, and we need to bring back the 90s. I don't care how bad the internet was, how not as advanced technology was. I just want to go back and watch my Hey Arnold, and watch my Rugrats, and Doug, and Cat Dog, and the Wild Thornberrys, because everything today sucks! Shut the hell up! God fucking damn. You could not sound any more selfish if you're really just going to make the claim that everything today sucks and that we need to fucking bring the 90s back. I mean, sure, I like to listen to a lot of 80s music, and a lot of my favorite music comes from the 80s, but I would never want to, bring it back and not advance like we've been doing for so many years. We've been advancing and progressing, at least in technology. So much we've been advancing. I would never want to bring the 80s back just because I like 80s music. Nor would I the 90s just because of cartoons. I don't want to have to throw the get a life argument out, but it really applies. You really need to get one if really all you care about is, wanting to bring the 90s back, bring 90s shows back, just live in the 90s again. I'd say wake up and start living in reality. The 90s aren't coming back. We're going to keep moving forward. And if you just really want to be stuck in the past, take nostalgia to an entirely new and pretty dangerous level, then you're just a really sad person. Sure, those cartoons that I spoke about in that video, they're great shows. And I can still, go on the internet and watch them whenever I feel like it. But I wouldn't want to go as far as to say everything today sucks, because that is a lie. Again, there's still good music being made, shows being produced, movies being made, that you're just really not taking into full account. You don't realize how great they actually are, Like, My favorite movie, for example, Wedding Crashers. That movie was from 2004. It's not a 90s movie, but it's still a good movie. Mastodon, they weren't from the 90s. They didn't come out in the 90s, but they're still a good band. And Big Bang Theory here, it's not a 90s show, but in my opinion, it is still a good show, regardless of what decade it comes from. It shouldn't matter what decade something comes from, as long as you find it to be good. That's all that really matters, and it's really not worth wanting to bring back an entire, decade or culture. It's not worth it. You just need to accept that and continue living your life moving forward. You can still have your fond memories of all your favorite shows growing up, but that's what we need to do. We need to grow up. I have grown up. I still like to look back on a lot of things from my childhood, but I've grown up, and that's what you need to do. So, that's all I gotta say about this, about these 90s elitists. 2000s are fine. And I'm fine living in the 2000s. I'm fine with the way things are now for the most part. Sure, I may not like some certain music or whatever, but for the most part, I'm fine with the way things are now. I'm Shades, and I'll see you next time.